The rain fell in slick, oily sheets, plastering discarded newspapers to the asphalt, and turning the alley into a corridor of distorted neon reflections. It was a world away from the sterile perfection of Victoria Sterling's 40th floor penthouse, where even the air was filtered, purified, and silent. Here in the city's grimy underbelly, the air was thick with the stench of damp concrete and desperation. And tonight, desperation had a name: Liam Hayes. He was backed against a graffiti-scarred brick wall, the rough surface digging into the thin fabric of his jacket. Three men, their faces contorted by a cheap, predatory anger, formed a tight semicircle around him. One of them, the largest, shoved a finger into Liam's chest. "You think you can just walk away? We saw you. You lifted his wallet." "I didn't." Liam's voice was barely a whisper, swallowed by the hiss of the rain. His face, young and etched with a weariness that didn't belong to his years, was pale under the flickering glow of a nearby bar sign. He was a ghost, an outline of a person about to be erased. His eyes darted around, searching for an escape that didn't exist, for a witness in a city that specialized in looking away. This was the exact moment Victoria Sterling's black town car purred to a stop at the corner. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her life was a fortress of scheduled meetings and calculated acquisitions, not spontaneous detours through nameless, rain-slicked streets. But a sudden, suffocating wave of ennui had driven her from her sanctuary, a craving for something real, something unscripted. She had found it. Through the tinted, rain-beaded glass, she watched the scene unfold with the detached curiosity of a biologist observing a foreign species. The boy, he was barely a man, was a specimen of helplessness. The men circling him were a study in brute force. It was a common, ugly tableau. Her driver shifted, his hand moving instinctively toward the console phone. "Ma'am?" Victoria raised a single, perfectly manicured finger. "Wait." She saw the boy's hands, held up in a gesture of placating surrender. They were empty. She saw the bigger man's grin, a flash of crooked teeth. She saw the fear in the boy's eyes, not just of a beating, but of the machine that would come next. The accusation, the arrest, the charge that would cling to him like the damp chill in the air, ruining whatever fragile future he might have. It was an inefficient, unjust equation, and it offended her legal mind more than her morality. If your own heart is pounding at the sight of this raw injustice, you know exactly the feeling that, for the first time in a decade, began to flicker deep inside Victoria. The door of the town car opened with a soft, hydraulic sigh. The rain did not dare to touch her. A sleek, black umbrella, deployed by her driver with military precision, shielded her as she stepped onto the wet pavement. Her heels clicked with an authority that cut through the alley's miserable symphony. The three men turned, their aggression momentarily disrupted by this apparition of wealth and power. Victoria Sterling was not a person. She was an event. Dressed in a tailored charcoal coat that cost more than their combined yearly incomes, her silver blonde hair pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, she radiated an aura of untouchable control. "There seems to be a misunderstanding," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried the chilling resonance of a courtroom verdict. The leader scoffed, trying to regain his footing. "This ain't your business, lady. This thief—" "You are accusing him of larceny," Victoria interrupted, her gaze sweeping over them, cold and analytical. "Specifically stealing a wallet from, I presume, one of you." She gestured with a leather-gloved hand toward a balding man who had remained silent. "Sir, you are the alleged victim?" The man blinked, bewildered. Yeah. He bumped into me and you discovered your wallet was missing immediately thereafter," Victoria finished for him. "And having seen no one else in your immediate vicinity, you concluded he must be the perpetrator. A logical fallacy known as post hoc ergo propter hoc, a common error." She took another step forward, her eyes locking onto the leader. "I, however, have a dash camera in my vehicle that has been recording this entire street corner for the last 5 minutes. It shows the three of you following this young man for half a block. It will also show that your friend's wallet is currently in your own back right pocket." A thick, profound silence fell over the alley, broken only by the drumming of the rain. The leader's face went from smug to panicked. His hand twitched toward his back pocket. It was a fatal tell. I can call the police and we can have them review the footage, Victoria continued, her tone dangerously smooth. They can add attempted assault and filing a false report to the charges, or you can return the man's property and disappear. You have 10 seconds to choose. She didn't need 10. The wallet was practically thrown at the silent man. In less than 5 seconds, the three aggressors had melted back into the shadows they'd emerged from, leaving Liam alone, shivering, under the harsh neon light. He stared at Victoria, his expression a mixture of awe and utter confusion. He looked from her to the car, a gleaming black beast humming silently at the curb. He was saved, but he had simply been transferred from one predator to a much more powerful, inscrutable one. Victoria's gaze fell on him. Now that the problem was solved, a new, more inconvenient one stood in its place. The boy, Liam Hayes. He had nothing. It was written all over him, in the worn-out soles of his shoes, the threadbare cuffs of his jacket, the hollow look in his eyes that spoke of missed meals and slept-on benches. He was a loose end, a piece of litter the storm had washed up at her feet. "Where will you go?" she asked. The question was a formality, a clinical assessment. Liam shook his head, water dripping from his dark hair. I don't know. There's a shelter, but it's probably full." His honesty was pathetic, and yet it was clean, uncomplicated. For a woman whose life was a labyrinth of sub-clauses and veiled threats, his simple, stark reality was jarring. The ennui that had pushed her out into the night returned, but this time it was tinged with a bizarre, unwelcome curiosity. It was the same impulse that made one pick up a strange, broken object from the street just to see how it worked. "Get in the car," she said. It wasn't a request. Liam froze. "What? You are soaking wet and have nowhere to go. I'm offering you a temporary solution. I won't offer it twice." He hesitated for only a moment, a brief war playing out across his face between primal fear and desperate need. Need won. Without another word, he walked to the car and slipped into the plush leather interior, trying to make himself as small as possible, as if to avoid contaminating the pristine environment with his poverty. The ride was silent. Liam stared out the window at the city blurring past, a constellation of lights he could see but never touch. Victoria did not look at him. She stared straight ahead, a marble statue regretting a sudden illogical twitch. What had she done? She had broken a cardinal rule: never get involved, never acquire an asset with no discernible value. The car descended into a private subterranean garage and came to a stop. They took a silent elevator that opened directly into her home. And it wasn't a home. It was a statement. A vast expanse of white marble, glass, and brushed steel, with floor-to-ceiling windows revealing a panoramic, God's-eye view of the glittering metropolis below. It was less a living space and more an art gallery, curated for a single, solitary observer. Liam stood just inside the doorway, dripping onto a rug that likely cost more than he had ever earned in his life. He looked utterly painfully out of place, a wildflower trying to take root in a glacier. Victoria finally turned to him, her expression unreadable. "There is a guest suite down the hall, third door on the left. In the closet you will find clothes. In the bathroom, towels. I will have food sent up. We will discuss the terms of your stay in the morning." He just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. She watched him walk tentatively down the gleaming hall, his worn-out shoes squeaking softly on the polished marble. He was an anomaly, a variable she had foolishly introduced into her perfectly controlled equation, a virus in the system. An hour later, there was a soft knock on the door of her study. Liam stood there, transformed. He was dressed in a simple, perfectly tailored uniform of black trousers and a crisp white button-down shirt that had been left for him. His hair was damp and combed, his face scrubbed clean. The desperation was gone, replaced by a quiet, profound uncertainty. He was no longer the accused on the street. He was now the houseboy. He held a tray with a single untouched sandwich. I couldn't eat, ma'am. Not until I thanked you." His voice was soft but steady. "You didn't have to do what you did. You saved me." Victoria looked at him, truly looked at him for the first time. Without the grime and the fear, she saw the boyish architecture of his face, the earnest clarity in his dark eyes. He was not a problem to be solved or an asset to be managed. He was a person. And that, in the cold, solitary sovereign of her penthouse, was the most dangerous thing of all. He had taken his first steps into her gilded cage, a place of salvation and, she already knew, a new and far more complicated kind of confinement for both of them. Liam Hayes moved through the penthouse like a ghost, made of quiet deference. In the 2 weeks since Victoria Sterling had plucked him from the jaws of the legal system, he had become an anomaly, a whisper of warmth in a cathedral of cold glass and steel. He polished chrome that was already gleaming, straightened cushions that were already perfect, and filled silences that Victoria had spent a lifetime cultivating. He was not a servant, so much as a presence, a small, persistent glitch in the flawless operating system of her life. Victoria would watch him from her office, the frosted glass door obscuring just enough of his form to make him seem ethereal. She told herself it was due diligence, observing the man she had inexplicably brought into her sanctuary. But it was more than that. His simple, genuine gratitude was a foreign currency in her world, and it unsettled her. His quiet kindness was a virus, slowly beginning to corrupt the firewalls she had built around her heart. He never intruded, never presumed, yet his very existence was a constant, low-humming disruption to the solitary equilibrium she called peace. This disruption did not go unnoticed. J.P. Thorne, whose official title was Chief of Security, but whose true role was Guardian of the Sterling Fortress, observed Liam with the sharp, unblinking focus of a hawk. For 10 years, J.P. Thorne had curated Victoria's isolation, treating it not as a condition, but as a priceless, fragile treasure. He filtered her calls, vetted her appointments, and designed security protocols that were less about physical threats and more about preventing unauthorized human connection. He saw Liam Hayes not as a charity case, but as an invasive species. He saw the way Victoria's gaze would sometimes linger on the boy for a fraction of a second too long. He saw the subtle softening of the rigid lines around her mouth when Liam offered her a cup of tea she hadn't requested. To J.P. Thorne, this was a security breach of the highest order. His campaign began with insidious subtlety. A new set of household protocols appeared overnight, printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock and placed in a leather-bound binder in the staff kitchen. Protocol 714. All footsteps within the East Wing are to be kept below 20 decibels after 9 p.m. Protocol 802. All reflective surfaces are to be polished using a counterclockwise motion only to align with the building's energy grid. They were absurd, Byzantine rules, designed not for efficiency but for intimidation. They were meant to remind the houseboy of his place, to shrink him back into the invisibility from which he had come. One afternoon, J.P. Thorne found Liam in the Grand Library, carefully dusting a collection of first-edition law books. "Hayes," Thorne's voice was a low, clipped instrument of authority. "I've been reviewing the atmospheric logs. The humidity in this room rose by 0.03% during your cleaning cycle. Refer to Protocol 936, subsection B. Respiratory exhalations must be moderated to maintain atmospheric stasis." Liam paused, a soft cloth in his hand, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne, I was just breathing." "Precisely," Thorne said, his eyes cold and flat. "An uncalibrated variable. See that it is calibrated." He turned and left, the silence he left in his wake heavier than any sound. Liam stood there for a long moment, feeling the vast, opulent room press in on him, making him feel smaller than ever. The message was clear. You don't belong here, you are a problem to be managed. If you've ever been made to feel small in a place you were just trying to survive, you know the crushing weight Liam felt in that moment. Show some love if you believe in the power of dignity to overcome cruelty. This fragile, tense ecosystem was shattered on a Tuesday afternoon by the arrival of a hurricane named Genevieve Dubois. She didn't enter the penthouse, she conquered it, a whirlwind of vibrant silk, expensive perfume and laughter that was both musical and predatory. Genevieve was Victoria's oldest friend, a woman who navigated the treacherous waters of high society with the ruthless grace of a shark. She was everything Victoria was not, effusive, tactile, and transparent in her appetites. "Vicky, darling," she boomed, air-kissing both of Victoria's cheeks while her eyes scanned the room, instantly cataloguing everything new. And then her eyes landed on Liam, who was quietly offering her a tray with a glass of sparkling water. Genevieve stopped mid-sentence. Her perfectly painted smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened with the focus of a collector spotting a rare artifact. "Well, hello," she purred, her gaze sweeping over Liam from head to toe. She ignored the water and placed a manicured hand on his forearm, her red nails a stark slash of color against his crisp white sleeve. "And who is this exquisite creature? Vicky, you've been holding out on me." Liam flinched almost imperceptibly at the touch, his discomfort a tangible thing in the air. "I'm Liam Hayes, ma'am. I work for Miss Sterling." "Liam," Genevieve repeated the name slowly as if tasting it. "No, darling. A man who looks like you doesn't work. He is appreciated. Isn't that right, Vicky?" She shot a look at Victoria, a playful but distinct challenge in her eyes. Victoria, who had been observing the interaction with a glacial stillness, felt a strange, hot coil tighten in her stomach. It was an unfamiliar sensation, ugly and primitive. "He is my employee, Genevieve. Please don't harass the staff." Her voice was colder than usual, each word a carefully shaped shard of ice. Genevieve just laughed, a bright, tinkling sound that grated on Victoria's nerves. "Oh, don't be such a bore. I'm just being friendly." She turned her full attention back to Liam, her charm offensive now in full motion. "So, Liam, what's your story? Rescued from some dreary common life by our very own St. Victoria?" She ran her finger down his arm, a possessive, tracing gesture that made Liam's shoulders tense. "She has a habit of collecting strays, but you, my dear, are a purebred." Over the next hour, Genevieve's pursuit was relentless and calculated. She asked Liam invasive questions, complimented his physique under the guise of admiring his uniform, and found every possible excuse to touch him. She was marking her territory, making it clear that she saw him not as a person, but as a prize, an intriguing new toy that her notoriously detached friend seemed to be casually disregarding. And the more Genevieve pushed, the tighter that coil in Victoria's stomach became. She tried to rationalize the feeling. It was annoyance. Genevieve was disrupting the order of her home. It was a misplaced sense of responsibility. She had saved Liam, and she felt a duty to protect him from predators like Genevieve. It was anything but what it truly was: jealousy. A raw, possessive jealousy that horrified her. The idea of Genevieve's hands on him, of her predatory gaze devouring him, sent a spike of something dangerously close to rage through her veins. She, Victoria Sterling, the solitary sovereign who had never needed anyone, was feeling possessive over a boy she had found on the street. The thought was so absurd, so destabilizing that it made her feel physically ill. The visit culminated with Genevieve standing at the door, ready to leave. She turned to Liam, who was standing a respectful distance away. "Liam, darling," she said, her voice dripping with insinuation. "My driver is off for the evening. I feel terribly unsafe taking a cab. Perhaps you could see me home." She gave him a slow, deliberate wink, a final brazen move made directly in Victoria's line of sight. Before Liam could even formulate a response, Victoria's voice cut through the air, sharp and absolute. "He will not." It wasn't a suggestion, it was a verdict. Genevieve's eyebrows shot up in feigned surprise. "Oh? And why not? I'm sure he wouldn't mind." Victoria walked slowly towards them, her movements measured and deliberate like a predator closing in. She stopped directly in front of Genevieve, her gaze unwavering. "Because his duties are here, with me. JP will arrange a car for you." The unspoken message hung between them, thick and suffocating. "He is mine." A slow, knowing smile spread across Genevieve's face. She had found the crack in the armor. She had discovered the one thing in this sterile fortress that Victoria Sterling might actually care about. "Of course, darling. Whatever you say." She leaned in and whispered in Victoria's ear, her voice a venomous caress. "You should be careful, Vicky. Things you leave lying around have a way of getting picked up by someone who will appreciate them more. And as Genevieve's laughter echoed down the hall, Victoria Sterling stood frozen in her own foyer, the silence pressing in. She didn't look at Liam. She couldn't. All she could feel was a chilling certainty. A war had just been declared for a man she refused to admit she even wanted, and it was a war she had no intention of losing. The terror was a cold, unfamiliar thing coiling in Victoria Sterling's gut. It was an invasive species in the meticulously curated ecosystem of her emotions, and its name was Liam. His quiet, unassuming presence had become a splinter under her skin, and Genevieve's predatory interest was the thumb pressing down on it, driving it deeper. Vulnerability was a liability, a fatal flaw in the architecture of power she had so carefully constructed. The only logical response was to excise it. She found Liam in the vast, sun-drenched kitchen, polishing a silver coffee pot, with a focus that was both maddening and, to a secret part of her, deeply admirable. He was restoring order to a small corner of her world, and all she wanted to do was introduce chaos. "Liam," she said. Her voice was clipped, the sound of a gavel falling. He stopped, turning to face her. The afternoon light caught the earnestness in his eyes, an unguarded sincerity that felt like an accusation. "Yes, Miss Sterling. We need to establish new parameters for your employment," Victoria began, her words as sterile as the surrounding steel countertops. "My decision to offer you shelter was an act of professional charity. It seems that line has become blurred. From this point forward, your duties will be confined to the service areas of the penthouse. You will not enter my personal office, my suite, or the main living area unless expressly summoned. Communication will be limited to household matters only. Is that understood?" Each word was a brick she was laying, rebuilding the wall between them. Yet, as she spoke, she couldn't tear her gaze from his face. She watched for the flicker of hurt, the tightening of his jaw, the flash of resentment she felt she deserved. Instead, Liam simply nodded, his expression unreadable but for a profound, quiet sadness that was far worse than any anger. "Perfectly, Miss Sterling," he replied, his voice even. He didn't question her. He didn't argue. He simply accepted the decree, his dignity a silent rebuke to her cruelty. He turned back to the coffee pot, his movements just as deliberate as before, and the dismissal was so absolute it left Victoria feeling strangely hollow, as if she were the one who had just been put in her place. She spun on her heel and walked away, the sharp click of her stilettos on the marble floor sounding like a frantic retreat. Her carefully erected barriers, however, proved laughably inadequate against the combined forces of J.P. Thorne's obsessive micromanagement and Genevieve Dubois' relentless campaign. 2 days later, an alarm blared through the penthouse, a piercing shriek that sent Victoria storming from her office. She found J.P. in the main corridor, frantically tapping at a security panel. "The environmental control system in the archival vault has malfunctioned," J.P. announced, sweat beading on his upper lip. "The temperature is plummeting. Your father's original corporate charters are in there. They'll be ruined by condensation if we can't reset the mainframe manually." He pointed a trembling finger at a small access panel near the floor. "The override is mechanical. It requires a delicate touch. My hand, they're too large." It was, Victoria knew, a ridiculous assertion. But before she could argue, Liam appeared, drawn by the alarm. "I worked on refrigeration systems for a summer," he offered quietly, his eyes on the panel, not on her. "I might be able to help." Victoria's first instinct was to refuse, to call in a team of overpriced technicians. But J.P., his panicked expression, and the thought of her father's legacy turning to pulp forced her hand. "Fine," she snapped. "Do it." The vault was a small, windowless room, and the air was already bitingly cold. As Liam knelt by the panel, deftly removing the cover, Victoria found herself trapped in the confined space with him. She stood with her arms crossed, watching his slender, capable fingers navigate the complex web of wires and circuits. He moved with a quiet confidence, his brow furrowed in concentration. She noticed the way a stray lock of dark hair fell across his forehead, the subtle flex of the muscles in his forearm. The silence in the small room was deafening, broken only by the hum of the failing system and the sound of their breathing. He wasn't looking at her, wasn't speaking to her, adhering to her new rules with a precision that was its own form of defiance. And in that enforced proximity, the wall she had built felt less like a fortress and more like a cage, with her on the inside, alone. The final assault on her composure came that evening. Genevieve had invited herself over for drinks, her presence a swirl of expensive perfume and sharp, calculating smiles. Victoria was nursing a scotch in the living area, a space Liam was forbidden to enter, when she heard Genevieve's predatory laugh echo from the hall. A prickle of unease ran down her spine. She rose and walked toward the sound, her steps silent. She found them near the grand entryway. Genevieve had cornered Liam, who was holding an empty tray. She had placed a hand on his arm, her red nails a splash of blood against the crisp white of his uniform shirt. "You're just too fascinating to be hidden away polishing silver, Liam," Genevieve purred, her voice dripping with insinuation. "A man with your history. Victoria doesn't appreciate what she has, but I do." She leaned closer, her eyes glittering. "Perhaps you'd be happier working for someone who recognizes your true potential." Liam stood perfectly still, his gaze fixed on a point over Genevieve's shoulder. He looked like a man trapped, too polite to pull away, but visibly uncomfortable. "I'm grateful for the opportunity Ms. Sterling has given me," he said, his voice tight. It was the sight of Genevieve's hand on him, the possessive gesture, the flagrant claim that made something in Victoria snap. "Genevieve," Victoria's voice cut through the air, as cold and sharp as breaking ice. "I believe the staff are busy. If you need something, you may ask me." Genevieve turned, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She didn't remove her hand from Liam's arm. "Oh, Victoria, darling. I was just getting to know your charming houseboy. You find the most interesting little strays." The condescension, the implication that Liam was a pet, a thing to be collected, ignited a white-hot fury in Victoria. "He is not a stray," she said, each word low and dangerous. "He is an employee, and you will unhand him now." The air crackled with tension. Genevieve finally withdrew her hand, feigning innocence with a theatrical shrug. "So territorial," she murmured, her gaze flicking between Victoria's rigid posture and Liam's stoic face. "I had no idea you cared so much." After Genevieve had finally departed, leaving a trail of smug satisfaction in her wake, Victoria retreated to the sanctuary of her bedroom. But there was no peace to be found. She paced the length of the enormous room, the luxurious silk rug doing nothing to soften the harsh impact of her steps. Her mind was a maelstrom. She replayed the scene in the hall. The image of Genevieve's hand on Liam's arm burned into her memory. It wasn't just annoyance, it wasn't a proprietary concern for an employee. It was a raw, primal jealousy so potent it stole her breath. She wanted to hurt Genevieve. She wanted to shield Liam. She wanted him. The admission was a devastating blow to her sense of self, a crack in the foundation of the solitary sovereign. She, who acquired companies and dismantled rivals without a flicker of emotion, was being undone by a boy she'd rescued from the street. The fear returned, colder and more suffocating than before. She was losing control. That night, sleep offered no escape. It dragged her into a technicolor nightmare, a twisted reflection of her deepest fears. She was at a grand gala, the very one she was scheduled to attend in a few months. The room was a sea of black tie and couture, the air thick with the murmur of polite gossip. But the sound was distorted, warped into a chorus of whispers that all seemed to be about her. She searched the crowd, a sense of dread building in her chest, and then she saw them. Across the ballroom, bathed in the warm glow of a chandelier, stood Genevieve. She was radiant, triumphant, her predatory smile amplified by a malicious glee that was terrifying to behold. Her hand rested protectively on a visibly pregnant belly, the swell of it prominent beneath a gown of shimmering gold, and beside her, his hand covering hers on her stomach, was Liam. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking powerful, confident, and utterly devoted. His gaze was fixed on Genevieve, an expression of adoration on his face that Victoria had never seen, an expression she now realized, with a soul-crushing certainty, she had desperately wanted for herself. The whispers in the room grew louder, coalescing into a single, devastating phrase that echoed in her mind. His child. His child. His child. The image seared itself into her brain. Genevieve had won. She hadn't just taken Liam, she had taken his future, a future Victoria hadn't even allowed herself to consciously desire, but now knew she craved with every fiber of her being. The dream. Victoria tried to scream, to cry out, but no sound emerged. She was paralyzed, forced to watch the perfect, happy life that should have been hers. Victoria awoke with a violent gasp, lurching upright in her bed. She was drenched in a cold sweat, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The pristine silence of her penthouse bedroom felt oppressive, suffocating. The nightmare clung to her, its horrific clarity more real than the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows. It wasn't just a dream, it was a prophecy of a desolate future she was actively creating. The carefully constructed walls of her emotional fortress didn't just crack, they shattered, imploding into dust. In that agonizing moment of raw, horrifying epiphany, she saw the truth. Her pride was not strength, it was a shield made of glass. Her classism was not a measure of superiority, it was a tool of fear. Her terror of emotional intimacy wasn't a defense mechanism. It was a self-imposed life sentence in solitary confinement. They were not her protectors, they were her enemies, and they were winning. The scream was a silent, jagged thing that tore through Victoria's throat but never reached the air of her penthouse. Her eyes snapped open, a gasp of icy air flooding her lungs. She was drenched, the 1,000-thread count Egyptian cotton sheets clinging to her skin like a cold, damp shroud. The dream clung to her still, its venomous residue coating her thoughts. Genevieve's triumphant, predatory smile, the swell of her belly beneath a silk gown. Liam, his face a mask of adoration, his eyes fixed on Genevieve, not on her. His child. The two words echoed in the cavernous silence of her bedroom, a pronouncement of a future stolen, a life she hadn't even realized she wanted until she saw it in another woman's grasp. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, panicked drumbeat against the sterile perfection of her life. For the first time in decades, Victoria Sterling was not in control. This wasn't a hostile takeover that could be strategized, or a legal opponent that could be dismantled with logic. This was a raw, visceral terror that came from the deepest part of her, a place she had bricked over and forgotten existed. She threw the covers off, her movements jerky and uncoordinated, and the cool air of the climate-controlled room did nothing to quell the fire of panic, licking at her insides. She stood unsteady and stared at her reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. Beyond her ghostly image, the city glittered, a cold, indifferent constellation of 1,000 other lives. But all she saw was a solitary figure, trapped in a cage of her own making. The solitary sovereign. A title she had cultivated, had worn like armor. Now it felt like an epitaph. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow, knocking the breath from her body. Her pride was not her shield, it was her prison. Her classism, her carefully constructed walls of professional distance and social hierarchy, were not defenses against the world. They were barricades against her own heart. She had been so afraid of vulnerability, so terrified of feeling anything that might disrupt the perfect, sterile order of her existence, that she had systematically amputated her own capacity for joy. She was the architect of her own desolate kingdom. And in her desperate bid to keep everything out, she had pushed away the one thing that had ever made its way inside. Liam. The realization was an agonizing, cleansing fire. In that moment of raw epiphany, the formidable lawyer, the titan of industry, shattered. The armor she had spent a lifetime forging turned to dust, and what was left was just a woman, terrified of being alone. She had to go to him, now, before the dream became a prophecy. She didn't bother with a robe, her bare feet silent on the polished marble as she crossed the vast living space. Each step was a surrender. Each breath was a prayer. The penthouse, usually a testament to her power and success, felt impossibly large and empty, a museum of a life unlived. She stopped before the door to his room, the room designated for the houseboy. The very thought sent a wave of shame through her. She had given him a place to stay, but she had never truly let him in. She had kept him at arm's length, a curious anomaly, a charitable project, defined by the uniform she made him wear. Her hand trembled as she raised it to knock, but she couldn't. What would she say? How could she articulate the cataclysm that had just occurred within her soul? Instead, her fingers closed around the cold metal of the handle, and she pushed the door open. The room was dark, save for the sliver of city light cutting through the blinds. Liam was awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, his back to her. He was dressed, as if ready to leave. The sight sent a fresh spike of terror through Victoria. He was leaving. She had finally succeeded in pushing him away. "Liam," she whispered. Her voice was a raw, broken thing she didn't recognize. He turned, his expression guarded, weary. He had seen the worst of her in the last few days, the dismissiveness, the cruel, cutting remarks designed to re-establish a distance she now knew would kill her. "Victoria," he said, his tone flat, I think it's time for me to go. Thank you for everything." "No." The word was a plea, sharp and desperate. She took a step into the room. "Don't!" She saw the confusion in his eyes. This was not the Victoria he knew. This was not the woman who commanded boardrooms and built empires. This was someone else, someone stripped bare. She closed the distance between them, stopping just before him. Her heart was a frantic bird in her chest. For years, her most intimate contact had been the signing of a contract. Now she reached out and her fingers brushed against his arm. The contact was electric, a jolt of life that seemed to travel through her entire being. "Stay," she said, her eyes pleading with him to understand everything she couldn't say. "Please stay with me." It wasn't a command. It was a surrender. And in his eyes, she saw not pity, but a flicker of understanding. A deep, quiet recognition of the truth that had been arcing between them all along. He didn't speak. He simply covered her hand with his own, his warmth seeping into her, chasing away the last of the nightmare's chill. In that silent moment, the world shifted. The solitary sovereign abdicated her throne. What happened in the months that followed was not just a transformation, it was a reconstruction. Victoria didn't just love Liam, she elevated him. She saw the keen intellect and the quiet determination he possessed, qualities the world had never bothered to look for. With a ferocity she had once reserved for corporate battles, she became his greatest advocate. Her vast network of contacts was mobilized, not for acquisitions but for introductions. Her sharp business acumen was now used to vet his ideas, to help him shape his ventures. She funded his first tech startup, not as a patron, but as a founding partner. The uniform was burned. The houseboy was erased from existence. In his place, Liam Hayes, the entrepreneur, emerged. He wasn't her creation. He was a man finally given the opportunity to become who he was always meant to be. And Victoria, watching him command a room of investors with the same quiet dignity he'd had when facing down false accusers on the street, felt a pride more profound than any billion-dollar deal. The culmination of this new reality arrived on a crisp autumn evening at the annual Thornton Foundation Gala, the absolute pinnacle of the city's philanthropic scene. The ballroom was a sea of couture gowns and bespoke tuxedos, a glittering assembly of the very same social elite who would have looked straight through Liam Hayes just 1 year prior. But tonight, they couldn't ignore him. He stood beside Victoria Sterling, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He wore a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but it was the confidence in his bearing that truly commanded attention. Whispers followed them like a wake. "Is that her bodyguard?" one woman murmured behind her fan. "No, darling," her companion corrected. "That's Liam Hayes. His new app just secured its 3rd round of funding. They say he's the next big thing. Victoria is his primary investor." Genevieve Dubois was there, of course. She watched them from across the room, her smile brittle, her eyes holding the cold, flat disappointment of a predator who had lost her prize. She saw not just a man who had slipped from her grasp, but a version of Victoria she had never seen before. Open, radiant, unguarded, utterly happy. After the main address, as the orchestra swelled and waiters circulated with champagne, Liam gently squeezed Victoria's hand. "Will you excuse me for a moment?" he murmured, a mysterious light in his eyes. He walked to the small stage at the front of the room where the Foundation's chairman had just finished his speech. He spoke quietly to the man, who nodded and handed Liam the microphone. A soft feedback hum quieted the room. Hundreds of curious, powerful faces turned toward him. "Good evening," Liam began, his voice calm and steady, carrying easily across the opulent space. "My name is Liam Hayes. Many of you don't know me. A little over a year ago, I had nothing. I was invisible. To a city like this, to a room like this, I didn't exist. And on one particular night, I was almost erased completely." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Victoria's heart began to beat faster. She had no idea what he was doing. "I was saved," Liam continued, his eyes finding hers across the crowded room, holding her gaze. "I was saved by a woman who had every reason to walk by, every reason to remain in her world and leave me to be swallowed by mine. She saw something in me that no one else had, including myself. She gave me shelter, she gave me a chance, but more than that, she saw me." He started to walk down from the stage, microphone in hand, his path parting the sea of socialites until he was standing directly in front of her. The entire room was silent, holding its collective breath. "People will say she invested in my company," Liam said, his voice now softer, meant only for her yet broadcast to all. "They'll talk about money and influence and power, but they have it wrong. Victoria Sterling's greatest investment was not in my business. It was in my heart." And then, in an act that sent a tidal wave of shock through the assembled elite, Liam Hayes, the boy from the streets, the former houseboy, got down on one knee before Victoria Sterling, the solitary sovereign. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple, impossibly elegant ring. "You acquired a broken man and showed him what it was to be whole," he said, his voice thick with emotion but unwavering. "Now I am asking you to merge your life with mine permanently. Victoria Sterling, will you marry me?" For a moment, there was only the sound of Victoria's sharp intake of breath. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, not of sadness, but of a joy so profound it was painful. This was the ultimate acquisition, not of a company, but of a future. Not a hostile takeover, but a willing, beautiful surrender. She knelt down to meet his gaze, her billion-dollar empire, the watching crowd, and the entire world fading away until there was only him. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of a strength no one in that room had ever heard from her before. "My God, Liam. Yes." The flash of a dozen cameras was a silent explosion, a concussive wave of light that momentarily bleached the grand ballroom of all color. But for Victoria Sterling, the world had already narrowed to the small, velvet box in Liam Hayes' hand, to the impossible, brilliant diamond winking within it, and to the unwavering conviction in his eyes, the cacophony of gasps, the tidal wave of whispers that swept through the assembled elite. All of it was distant thunder. For the first time in her life, the judgment of a room full of powerful people was utterly irrelevant. All that mattered was the man kneeling before her, a man she had plucked from the gutter, and who in turn had rescued her from a gilded prison of her own making. A single hot tear escaped her control, tracing a path down her cheek she hadn't known was possible. She didn't wipe it away. It was a testament, a baptism. Her voice, when it came, was not the steel-edged instrument of the boardroom, but a fragile whisper, meant only for him. "Yes," Victoria Sterling said. "Of course, yes." Liam slid the simple, elegant ring onto her finger. It felt heavier than any corporate contract, more binding than any legal decree. As he rose to his feet, the room erupted not into polite applause, but into a chaotic symphony of stunned conversation. Victoria watched them, the titans of industry and queens of society, their faces a gallery of disbelief, envy, and frantic recalculation. They were seeing the impossible, the solitary sovereign, vanquished not by a hostile takeover, but by an act of profound surrender. Liam took her hand, his grip warm and steady, and in that moment They were an island of serene truth in a sea of opulent shock. The world they had known had just shattered, and from the pieces they would build a new one. In the weeks that followed, the tremors of that night continued to ripple through their lives. The penthouse, once a monument to sterile isolation, began to breathe. The scent of coffee Liam brewed in the morning replaced the faint antiseptic smell of industrial cleaner. Books he left open on the marble coffee table marred its perfect empty surface. One Tuesday morning, Victoria was on a video conference, her voice slicing through a multi-billion-dollar merger negotiation, when Liam walked past in the background, shirtless, a towel slung over his shoulder, completely oblivious. A younger Victoria would have been mortified, furious at the breach of professional protocol. Instead, she felt a slow, unfamiliar smile spread across her face. She paused mid-sentence, the CEO on the other end of the screen looking confused. "Gentlemen," Victoria announced, her voice losing none of its authority but gaining a new warm timbre, "something far more important than your EBITDA projections has come up. We will reconvene this afternoon." She ended the call, leaving a board of stunned executives staring at a blank screen, and followed Liam into the kitchen, the thrill of her small rebellion more satisfying than any corporate victory. Liam, for his part, wore his new reality not as a costume but as a second skin. At the helm of his burgeoning logistics company, Nexus Flow, funded by Victoria's sharp investment, but driven by his own innovative vision, he was a natural leader. He remembered names. He knew the janitor had a daughter starting college. He implemented a profit-sharing plan that his board, composed of Victoria's old guard associates, called reckless. "It's not reckless," Liam had argued calmly in a meeting, his quiet confidence silencing the room. "It's respect. You get loyalty by giving it. People aren't assets on a balance sheet." Victoria had watched from the back of the room, a silent observer, feeling a surge of pride so fierce it almost hurt. He wasn't just echoing her power, he was building his own, founded on a humanity she was only just learning to embrace. The most difficult adjustment fell to JP, the watchdog Thorn. He roamed the penthouse like a ghost haunting a home that no longer recognized him. His meticulously crafted rulebook, the Sterling Residence Operational Codex, was now a work of fiction. One afternoon, he found Liam attempting to hang a framed, slightly crooked photograph of a sunset he'd taken on his phone. "Sir," JP began, his voice stiff with years of ingrained protocol, "as per Section 11, subsection C, paragraph 4, all wall hangings must be approved by the curator and installed by authorized personnel to maintain structural and aesthetic integrity." Liam turned, a small nail held between his teeth. He smiled at Thorne, a kind, disarming expression. "JP," he said, his voice muffled by the nail. "It's a picture. It's supposed to make the place feel less like a museum, don't you think?" The simple question short-circuited Thorne's entire operational system. He stood there, conflicted, his loyalty to Victoria warring with the new, chaotic variable that was Liam. Later that week, Victoria called Thorne into her office. She didn't fire him. Instead, she slid a new portfolio across her desk. "The Sterling Hayes Foundation," she said. "Our first initiative is a pro bono legal aid and job placement program for the wrongly accused. I need someone to run it, someone with unimpeachable integrity, meticulous attention to detail, and a deep-seated desire to protect what matters." JP Thorne looked at the portfolio, then at Victoria. For the first time, he saw not just an employer, but a person. His rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. He was no longer a watchdog guarding an empty fortress. He was being asked to help build a sanctuary. He accepted without hesitation. As for Geneviève Dubois, her defeat was not a dramatic public spectacle, but a slow, quiet fade into irrelevance. She appeared at a charity auction a month after the engagement, draped in designer clothes and dripping with jewels, expecting to be the center of attention. But the whispers followed her, laced with pity and a touch of schadenfreude. The prize she had so brazenly coveted was not just won, but had proven to be something she could never understand. A heart, not a status symbol. She saw Victoria across the room, laughing at something Liam whispered in her ear. Her face illuminated with a genuine joy Geneviève had never seen on her before. In that moment, Geneviève understood. She hadn't lost a game. She had been playing the wrong one all along. She slipped out of the event early, a beautiful, predatory ghost in a city that had already moved on to a better story. Their journey was not a fairy tale. There were nights Liam felt the phantom weight of his old life, a flicker of insecurity, that he was an imposter in this world of polished marble and inherited power. There were moments Victoria's old defenses would rise, her first instinct to solve an emotional problem with a checkbook or a command. But they learned to navigate these moments together. One evening, reviewing plans for their foundation, Liam grew quiet. "Sometimes," he confessed, his voice low, "I feel like everyone is just waiting for the houseboy to trip and spill the drinks." Victoria put down her pen. She didn't offer a platitude or a dismissal. She moved closer, took his hand and looked directly into his eyes. "I see you, Liam Hayes," she said, her voice raw with sincerity. "Not the man they accused you of being, not the houseboy. I see the man who runs a company with more integrity than any CEO I've ever met. The man who taught me that a home is more than a collection of expensive things. The man I love." She held his gaze until she saw the doubt recede, replaced by the quiet strength that had drawn her to him in the first place. Months later, on the eve of their wedding, they stood before the vast floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. The city glittered below, a sprawling galaxy of a million other stories. It was the same view that had once represented Victoria's solitary kingdom and Liam's oppressive, indifferent machine. Now it was just a backdrop to their shared world. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. The glass was cool against their skin, but inside they were warm. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Liam asked softly. "How different everything would be if you had just kept walking?" Victoria leaned back into him, the diamond on her finger catching the city lights and scattering them like tiny stars. "I think about how different I would be," she corrected him, her voice filled with a quiet sense of wonder. "I was living in a fortress, convinced it was a castle. You didn't just save me from loneliness, Liam. You saved me from myself." They stood in silence for a long time, watching the endless stream of headlights, the pulse of the city that now felt like a part of them. The penthouse was no longer a cage or a symbol of power. It was a home, filled not with rules and silence, but with crooked photographs, shared dreams, and the revolutionary sound of two hearts beating as one. In a world that measured worth in dollars and connections, they had found the ultimate currency in seeing the dignity in another soul, proving that the greatest acquisitions in life are never owned, but are freely, fiercely, and finally given.